Miss Linda, the test results show that you have leukemia, and it's already at the mid-stage. We recommend that you be hospitalized for treatment immediately. Linda looked at the lab report the doctor handed her, and 2 streams of blood started flowing from her nose. She touched her slightly swollen belly, seemingly oblivious to the blood from her nose.
Doctor, if I undergo treatment, will it affect the baby in my womb?
If you can't find a matching stem cell donor for a transplant, you'll have to undergo chemotherapy, which will definitely affect the baby.
The doctor handed her a clean tissue.
I understand, thank you.
Linda took the tissue, bowed to the doctor, and then turned to leave.
Miss Linda, your condition is very serious. There's already bleeding in your brain. If you don't get treatment, you might only have 7 months left.
Linda walked faster and faster, ignoring the doctor's stern warning behind her, and eventually almost ran out of the hospital doors. She then took a deep breath, pulled her phone from her bag, and with trembling hands, dialed a number she knew by heart. As soon as the call connected, Linda seemed to transform, showing no sign of the previous panic.
Henry, I've made up my mind. Let's get a divorce.
There was a moment of silence on the other end, clearly not expecting Linda to say such a thing. After a pause, a cold male voice finally responded.
It's good that you've come to your senses. I'm busy right now, I'll hang up.
The Henry family villa. As soon as Linda entered, her gaze met the man sitting on the sofa, and she was startled.
Henry, why are you back?
This so-called home was a place Henry rarely visited each month. Henry snorted, leaned forward, and pointed to the document on the coffee table.
The divorce papers, sign them.
Only then did Linda's gaze move from the man to the coffee table, to the few sheets of white paper. She pressed her lips together and nodded.
Okay.
We'll divorce, and in 7 months, the child you give birth to will be raised by Sarah. As for you, you can have this house, and I'll give you $10 million as compensation.
Hearing this, Linda's brows furrowed, and she became anxious.
No, Henry, I don't want the house or the money. I just want the baby in my womb.
Sarah hated her so much, she would never treat her child well. Seeing that Henry remained silent, she continued to plead.
After you and Sarah get married, she can give you many children. But my child.
Linda, you're not fit to raise a child of the Henry family, understand?
I'm begging you, let me keep this child, please.
She took a deep breath, almost ready to kneel before this man.
Impossible.
Henry stood up from the sofa and walked past Linda without mercy.
By tomorrow morning, I want to see the signed divorce papers, or I'll take you for a procedure immediately.
The door slammed shut, and the man was gone. The next day. The noise downstairs woke Linda from her sleep. She had only fallen asleep in the middle of the night, and now being woken up again, her face looked very haggard.
Miss Linda, you can't go in. The young mistress is still resting.
I'm just here to see my sister.
With that, Sarah, accompanied by 2 tall bodyguards in black, walked in from outside.
What are you doing here?
Of course, I'm here to visit my dear sister. Henry said that if you don't sign the divorce papers today, I should take you to the clinic. I noticed you haven't signed the papers.
I won't give up this child.
The next moment, she signaled to the 2 bodyguards behind her.
Get to work.
The bodyguards immediately stepped forward, each grabbing one of Linda's arms, trying to drag her off the bed.
Let go of me. You have no right to do this.
Linda struggled, but her strength was no match for the 2 tall bodyguards.
This is Henry's decision. You have another choice, sign the divorce papers now, and I'll raise your child. But, you know how I'll treat this child, don't you?
Summoning strength from somewhere, Linda suddenly broke free from the bodyguards and charged at Sarah. She grabbed Sarah's slender neck with both hands. She couldn't let her child fall into Sarah's hands, no way.
Help, Henry! Linda is trying to hurt me.
Footsteps approached from the doorway, and then Linda heard a man's icy shout.
Linda, you wretch.
A force pushed her away, and she fell forward without warning. Her slightly swollen belly hit the edge of the bed, and Linda winced in pain.
Sarah, are you okay? I'll take you to the hospital.
Henry didn't spare Linda a glance. Instead, he picked up Sarah and walked out. At the door, he left a warning.
Linda, go to the clinic yourself, or I'll send someone to take you.
Linda leaned against the wall, the pain in her belly intensifying. When she looked down, she saw blood trickling down her legs. Amidst the shouting, yelling, and noise around her, Linda's mind went blank. What happened? Henry pushed her, then her belly hurt, and then, blood. She said nothing as the butler and others carried her to the car and took her to the hospital. She knew her face must look terrible now. She heard the butler urging the driver to hurry, and then, she heard nothing more.
Young mistress, you're awake? How do you feel? I'll call the doctor.
The butler was still by her side. Seeing her awake, he hurriedly asked and turned to call the doctor.
How is my child?
The butler stopped but didn't turn around, seemingly struggling with himself.
The child is gone?
Linda's hand went limp, her mouth slightly open, and tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. When she woke up again, she saw Henry. Looking at him, tears welled up in her eyes again. She wanted to tell him that their child was gone, that she was really heartbroken.
I heard you had a miscarriage. Well, now the child issue is resolved. Sign the papers.
Henry, do you really dislike me that much?
She didn't take the divorce papers but looked up at Henry, asking him. Henry didn't speak.
Do you really not want to see me anymore?
How many times do I have to say it? Yes, I don't want to see you. We'll both be better off separated.
Tears streamed down Linda's face again. She grabbed Henry's sleeve, almost choking as she asked why he was so indifferent, so heartless. Henry shook off Linda's hand, frowning deeply, his eyes filled with undisguised disgust. Linda looked down, staring blankly at her hand that had been shaken off, then looked up at the man she had always loved.
Enough, I don't want to waste any more time talking nonsense with you. Sign it quickly, I have other things to do.
Linda closed her eyes, forcing back the tears that were about to spill. Since he disliked her so much, why should she cling on? Letting go might really be the best choice.
I understand. Leave the divorce papers here, I'll sign them.
If you're going to sign, do it quickly.
Linda opened her eyes. Her skin was frighteningly pale, her lips devoid of color, and there were still traces of dried tears on her face.
Henry, we were once married. Considering that I've just lost my child, could you not push me so hard? I promise I'll sign it tomorrow, don't worry.
Maybe it was because Linda looked genuinely pitiful at that moment. Henry opened his mouth but said nothing more. He left without looking back. Watching the man leave and the divorce papers on the bed, Linda covered her face and cried out in near despair. The next day came quickly. Linda knew she couldn't delay any longer. She picked up the pen, her hand trembling, but she carefully wrote her name on the papers. Just as she finished, the door to the hospital room opened. Hearing the sound of high heels, she looked up. It was Sarah. This time, no one stopped her. Sarah walked in almost arrogantly and looked at Linda, letting out a laugh.
What are you doing here?
What am I doing here? Of course, I'm here to visit my dear sister. And also...
Sarah nodded towards the divorce papers in Linda's hand.
to see if you've really come to your senses.
Hearing this, Linda gripped the pen tighter.
Have you seen enough? If so, please leave.
Linda didn't want to see her anymore, but Sarah had no intention of leaving.
What? Trying to kick me out? Ha! shouldn't you be the one leaving? Remember, once you sign this, you won't have anything to do with Henry anymore. No compensation, no house, nothing. You'd better stay as far away from us as possible. But losing the baby might actually be a good thing. After all, if you had given birth to him, I can't guarantee what might have happened to him.
Linda looked up suddenly, glaring at Sarah in anger.
How can you say such things? I've already lost my child, and I've agreed to the divorce. Why do you still have to hurt me with your words?
Why?
Sarah bent down, leaning close to Linda.
If it weren't for you, I would have married Henry, not you, you wretch. If it weren't for you, how could I have suffered so much all these years? What right do you have to talk about hurt? Haven't you hurt me enough?
Linda had indeed told her father that she liked Henry very much, and that was a big reason why she married him. But what about after that? She spent every night alone in an empty room, and when she occasionally saw Henry, he was always full of disgust and impatience.
I won't divorce.
Sarah's eyes widened, her mouth agape, staring in disbelief at the woman on the hospital bed, who looked haggard but had a determined gaze. She pointed at Linda.
What did you say?
One sentence, two voices, sounded simultaneously. Linda and Sarah turned their heads at the same time and saw Henry standing at the door, his face slightly darkened as he stared at Linda.
What did you just say?
Linda also looked directly into the man's eyes, for the first time, without any fear.
I said, I won't divorce. She repeated calmly, enunciating each word, and raised the already signed divorce papers.
She tore the thin paper into pieces and threw them at Sarah. Henry's face darkened completely. He walked over quickly and grabbed Linda's wrist.
Do you know what you're saying and doing?
I know, it's because I know that I'm doing this. Linda still looked into Henry's eyes, accepting his scrutiny without any evasion.
Linda saw that Henry's eyes were already bloodshot. It seemed he was really angry.
Why should I be forced to divorce? Why should my child be taken away from me?
The woman who was so weak and always looked at his face for approval, today, dared to talk back to him. The two of them stared at each other for a long time. Finally, Henry let go of her hand, and Linda felt as if her wrist had lost all sensation.
Fine, very well. Remember what you said today. Let's see how long you can hold out. Henry seemed to be suppressing his anger. After saying this to Linda, he turned and prepared to leave.
Sarah glared at Linda fiercely and followed Henry out of the hospital room. For the first time, she had actually mustered the courage to confront Henry and even tore up the divorce papers. Suddenly, she heard a faint beep sound. Looking down, she saw a small red stain on the white bed sheet. She quickly covered her nose and stumbled into the bathroom. She was only 24 years old, but she had only 7 months left to live. She really didn't want to leave this world so soon. When her father passed away, he told her to live well and happily. She hadn't yet seen the world properly, hadn't visited the places she always wanted to go, hadn't tasted the delicious food she longed to try.
Miss One, we recommend that you start treatment immediately.
The doctor's words echoed in Linda's mind. If she accepted treatment, she would have a chance to live. She wanted to live. She couldn't just give up on herself like this.
Doctor, I accept the treatment. She sat in the consultation room, as if making a huge decision, solemnly speaking to the doctor.
It's great that you've decided to accept treatment. We will do our best to find a matching stem cell donor for you.
But I need to go home and inform my family. I'll come back tomorrow, okay?
It's good that you've made up your mind. Make sure you come back tomorrow.
Walking out of the hospital, a gust of wind blew, messing up Linda's hair. It was strange, even though spring had been here for so long, it was still so cold. She walked alone along the road home, completely unaware that two men were following her. The next day, the noise downstairs woke Linda from her sleep. She had only fallen asleep in the middle of the night, and now being woken up again, her face looked very haggard. By the time Linda realized what was happening, she could see nothing and couldn't speak. All she saw was an endless darkness. She kept trying to free her hands and feet from the ropes, but it was futile.
Little beauty, what are you trying to do? Trying to escape? Don't worry, we won't harm you. We're all good guys.
Stop talking nonsense and get to work. Let's finish the job and get the money.
With a ripping sound, Linda felt the tape being removed from her mouth, followed by the cloth covering her eyes. The sudden exposure to bright light made her squint several times before she could finally see. Two men stood in front of her.
Where have you taken me? What do you want?
The thin man threw the tape and cloth aside, looking at Linda with a sinister smile.
Miss Linda, we're not bad people. We're just hired hands. We do what we're paid to do. Isn't that right?
Was it Henry who sent you?
Who hired us is none of your concern. Don't worry, we won't do anything too extreme. But I must say, Miss Linda, you have quite a beautiful face.
As he spoke, he took out a knife and ran the back of it dangerously close to Linda's face. Standing before her, the two tall men made Linda feel a surge of panic, fear, and overwhelming despair. She never imagined Henry would hate her so much that he would resort to such humiliation. She struggled continuously, even with her hands and feet bound, twisting and resisting. Tears streamed down her face as she felt a deep sense of hopelessness. Just then, she heard the door being kicked open. Linda opened her eyes, and a beam of bright light flooded the previously dim room. Someone rushed in quickly. The person wielded a long stick, striking the back of the fat man's neck with precision. Linda watched as the fat man's eyes closed, and he collapsed to the ground. The thin man, realizing the danger, tried to throw a punch but was kicked away by the newcomer, unable to get up. The person quickly dropped the stick, knelt in front of Linda, and looked at her anxiously.
Linda, are you okay?
James? Linda could hardly believe she was seeing James again.
It's me. Are you hurt?
James said as he untied the ropes binding Linda.
You came back from the US? When did you return?
James helped her up as he replied.
I'll explain later. We need to leave here quickly.
As James supported Linda out, she realized they were in a remote area surrounded by woods. Sitting in James's car, Linda couldn't help but ask again.
How did you find me?
I actually just returned from the US yesterday. I was on my way to report to the hospital when I saw two men acting suspiciously, following you at a traffic light. I wasn't sure if it was you.
He paused before continuing.
But I decided to keep an eye on them, and I saw them knock you out and carry you away.
He looked at Linda again.
They didn't do anything to you, did they?
No, you arrived just in time.
James gripped her shoulders and made her look at him.
Linda, why did they come after you? Did something happen?
No, maybe they were just trying to rob someone rich but picked the wrong person.
James finally asked the question carefully.
Is it because Henry is treating you badly?
No, we're fine.
Linda forced herself to smile, but then she fainted from exhaustion in James's arms. When the car arrived at the Luo family villa, Linda was still unconscious. James didn't wake her up immediately but leaned over, watching her face. She had lost a lot of weight. Earlier on the street, he almost didn't recognize her. Her face was pale, and her eyelashes were still long, trembling slightly as she slept, indicating she hadn't been sleeping well. James closed his eyes, recalling the girl in the library years ago, clumsily standing on a chair to reach a book on the top shelf, wobbling until she fell into his arms. That girl, blushing and anxious, had stumbled into his heart. Later, he learned her name was Linda, that she was a design major, and that she spent every Wednesday afternoon quietly reading by the window on the fourth floor of the library. Every Wednesday afternoon, he would appear in the library, waiting for Linda, and would follow her as soon as she arrived. He knew Linda understood his feelings. He thought she liked him too. But she rejected his confession.
James, I like you, but it's the kind of like for a friend, not a lover. I don't want to lose you as a friend. Can we just be friends?
Back then, it was so simple. James thought, it doesn't matter if you don't like me now, it doesn't mean you won't like me in the future. I'll stay by your side, and one day, you'll fall for me. But he never expected that Linda would indeed fall in love, but not with him. Instead, she fell for the man now standing by his car window, hands in his pockets, eyes sharp as an eagle's. Henry. In the afternoon, Henry was sitting in his office when he received a call from Mr. Luo.
Henry, bring Linda to the party tomorrow night.
His father's voice on the other end was as emotionless as ever.
Dad, I'll be coming alone.
No way. I don't care if you two are planning to separate or who you want to be with, but right now you and Linda are still married, and she is still the young mistress of our family.
Hearing that Mr. Luo had hung up the phone, Henry sighed, threw the phone on the table, closed his eyes, and rubbed his temples.
Thinking back to that day in the hospital, when Linda defied me, and the things she said, although I was furious enough to almost want to harm her, after calming down, there was a strange feeling in my heart.
Returning to the villa that evening, just as Henry reached the door, he saw a car parked nearby. Instinctively, he turned to look and saw Linda sitting inside, with a man beside her. After a while, James opened the car door, stood in front of Henry, and extended his hand.
Hello, Mr. Luo.
But Henry kept his hands in his pockets, showing no intention of shaking hands with the man in front of him.
Why is my wife with you?
Hearing this, James couldn't help but laugh.
What, does Linda not have personal freedom? Is there a problem with old friends meeting up?
In that case, please step aside. I need to take my wife home.
With that, Henry strode over, opened the car door, and picked Linda up. As he passed James, he heard him say,
Mr. Luo, you shouldn't be so ungrateful. If you don't treat a pearl as a treasure, you'll regret it later.
Henry carried Linda into the house. The butler saw them and immediately walked over, surprised.
Young master, why are you back today? What happened to the young mistress?
She's asleep.
He tossed Linda onto the sofa. The butler said no more, quietly retreating, leaving Henry and Linda alone in the hall.
Why isn't she waking up?
After about 20 minutes, seeing no sign of Linda waking up, Henry felt very irritated. Did he have to wait for this woman to wake up? He walked over and, unwilling to even call her name, mercilessly pushed Linda twice.
No, please, don't.
Linda felt uneasy in her sleep. She kept dreaming of Henry and Sarah, looking at her with fierce expressions, forcing her to divorce, threatening her life if she didn't. She wanted to wake up, but it felt like she was trapped, unable to open her eyes. In the dream, she vaguely felt someone pushing her. The next moment, as if pushed awake by Henry, Linda frowned and slowly opened her eyes.
Why are you here?
This is my home. Why can't I be here?
What do you want?
After a moment of silence, Linda broke the eerie atmosphere first.
I'm just here to inform you that tomorrow night, you'll attend the banquet my father is hosting with me.
Henry stood up after speaking, dusted off his clothes, and seemed ready to leave. But to his surprise, Linda looked at him and said,
Why should I go?
Henry paused, looked down at Linda still sitting on the sofa, and his eyes narrowed, his tone heavier than before.
What did you say?
Why should I go? Just because you inform me, I have to go?
What right do you have to say no to me?
Henry's face completely darkened.
Henry, what about you? How do you think you can come to me after what you did and ask me to attend a banquet with you?
What did I do to you?
Henry, why are you being so childish? Are you still pretending to be ignorant?
Linda was convinced that Henry had sent people to kidnap her, and now his expression seemed like a cover-up to her.
I advise you to attend the banquet tomorrow on time, where you will be facing not just me, but the entire Luo family.
The next day was beautiful, with bright sunshine. As Sarah was about to leave, she received a phone call.
What? How could Linda, who had just undergone a procedure, escape from two men?
Boss, the girl you asked us to deal with yesterday, she got away. We had already tied her up, but then a man came and rescued her.
Useless. You two are useless. No, I can't let her off so easily.
Her phone showed a new message. She picked it up and saw it was from Emily.
Tonight's Luo family banquet, Linda is actually going with Henry.
Sarah stared at the message for a full 5 minutes, then suddenly smiled. Linda walked into the hall with her arm linked through Henry's, drawing everyone's attention.
Isn't that the second daughter of the Wynn family?
Yes, she's been married into the Luo family for over 3 years, but it's rare to see them together. I thought they were divorced.
Oh, if the young master of the Luo family got divorced, that would be big news.
But looking at them, it doesn't seem like their relationship is good.
You don't know. I heard that the Wynn family daughter insisted on marrying the young master of the Luo family.
At this moment, she should have been in the hospital receiving treatment, but now she had to be here, standing and being scrutinized and gossiped about.
What are you doing?
Suddenly, her arm was grabbed harshly. She turned to see Henry looking at her with a stern face.
What is it?
Linda was startled, touched her nose, and saw blood on her fingers. She quickly covered her nose, glanced at Henry, and hurried to the restroom. Fortunately, it was dance time, so no one noticed the embarrassed Linda. Except for Henry, who kept frowning as he watched Linda leave, lost in thought. Only 2 weeks had passed, but looking at herself in the mirror, Linda felt exhausted. Linda tiredly walked out of the restroom and saw Sarah holding Henry's arm, standing very close to him.
Sister, I've been looking for you everywhere.
Let go of me, I want to go back.
I called you over, so come on.
Sarah pulled her over. Standing in front of Henry, Linda hadn't even started to speak when Sarah walked over and held Henry's arm again. Linda stood there, staring blankly at them.
What's going on? Why is another woman with the young master of the Luo family holding his arm, and the young master isn't saying anything?
Let me see. Oh my, isn't that the eldest daughter of the Wynn family?
What? The eldest daughter of the Wynn family, holding her brother-in-law's arm in front of her sister.
This is quite a show.
The chatter around her, Sarah's smug face, and Henry's seemingly gloomy eyes filled Linda's ears and eyes. Linda said nothing more. She turned to leave, but Sarah grabbed her hand again and whispered in her ear.
It's been a long time since we sisters had a good chat. Let's go outside and talk. Henry, I'll go have a chat with Linda.
Sarah dragged Linda to the swimming pool at the back of the venue. Once they were away from the crowd, Linda quickly shook off Sarah's hand.
So, did you have fun tonight?
Without waiting for Linda's response, Sarah became a bit angry. But Linda remained calm, looking at her with a hint of pity in her eyes.
What do you mean by that look, Linda?
Why be so childish? Is it worth it?
What did you say? Do you think you're so great just because you escaped yesterday? Let me tell you, you can't escape from my grasp.
Hearing this, Linda's eyes widened. She stared at Sarah.
Was it you who sent people to kidnap me yesterday?
Ha, yes, it was me. I'm not afraid to let you know. Do you think you can make my life difficult? Do you think you can steal Henry from me? Dream on.
Linda's anger rose as Sarah continued.
You're just a lowlife. And your mother, who passed away over 20 years ago, was a lowlife too.
Shut up. What nonsense are you spouting?
Linda raised her hand, but Sarah grabbed it.
What? You want to hit me? Let me, as your elder sister, teach you how to behave.
With that, Sarah raised her hand high. Linda instinctively closed her eyes, but the expected pain did not come. She opened her eyes to see a hand gripping Sarah's raised wrist. At the same time, Sarah turned her head, ready to scold whoever dared to interfere. But when she saw it was Henry, she was so frightened she could barely speak.
Henry, why are you here?
What did you mean by what you just said?
Sarah's face turned pale. She looked at Henry in a panic.
What? I was just catching up with Linda.
I asked what you did to Linda.
Sarah felt wronged. She had only sent 2 people to teach Linda a lesson. Was it necessary to use such a tone and look at her like that?
I just had 2 people tie her up and scar her face. What's the big deal? It's just a scar, I didn't have her harmed. What did I do that was so terrible? And this lowlife even escaped,
Suddenly, a loud slap echoed.
You hit me?
Sarah couldn't believe it. Henry actually had the heart to hit her. And for that lowlife Linda.
I hit you to make you calm down. Sarah, I never thought you would do such a thing. How did you become like this?
Tears streamed down Sarah's face. She looked at Henry and said bitterly,
You're disappointed in me? How dare you be disappointed in me? If it weren't for you, if it weren't for my love for you, would I have done such a thing?
With that, she ran off crying. Linda watched her leave, sighing inwardly. She waited for Henry to chase after Sarah before leaving herself. Seeing that he had no intention of leaving, Linda prepared to walk away. Just as she lifted her foot, the man spoke.
Don't you have anything to say to me?
Linda looked up at Henry. For once, his brows were not furrowed, and his expression was calm and serene, something she hadn't seen in a long time.
Didn't you accuse me before?
Linda remembered. She had indeed suspected that Henry had sent people to kidnap her and had questioned him about it last night. She pulled her hand away and looked at Henry, speaking calmly.
Henry, let's get a divorce.
It was a mistake to think you had me taken away. I apologize for that. But whether it was Sarah's people or yours, what's the difference? Ultimately, it was because of you.
Seeing Sarah constantly guard against me because of you, I'm really tired. Since my presence makes all 3 of us so miserable, I've come to a decision. Let's get a divorce.
Linda felt that tonight was the most she had spoken to Henry in the past 5 years. Unfortunately, it was also the last time. She lowered her head, no longer looking at the man in front of her, and hurriedly left. Early the next morning, Linda signed the divorce papers. After handing them to the lawyer, she packed all her belongings and quietly left the home she had lived in for 5 years without disturbing anyone. She then headed to the hospital, now able to peacefully receive treatment. While waiting at a traffic light, she watched the cars and pedestrians come and go. Suddenly, she felt as if she had been reborn, with the darkness seemingly leaving her, and life appearing to become beautiful. The next moment, someone pushed her from behind, causing her to lunge forward. On the opposite side of the road, a truck was dangerously approaching. She heard the driver honking incessantly, but she couldn't control her body from falling forward, watching helplessly as the truck came closer. Just as the truck was about to hit Linda, she fell into someone's arms.
Linda, are you okay? Are you hurt?
James? It's you. You saved me again.
Yes, it's me. Are you all right?
James helped Linda up and was about to speak when a sharp voice interrupted him.
Linda, why aren't you gone yet? Just go away already.
Did you push me from behind?
So what if I did? Why haven't you divorced Henry yet? Why haven't you let us be together? Why aren't you gone?
Sarah tried to push Linda onto the road again, but James quickly pulled Sarah away. She still wanted to act, but James had to keep blocking her.
I've already divorced him. The divorce papers are signed and given to him.
Really?
Yes, you can go ask him. From now on, we have nothing to do with each other. James, let's go.
When they saw Dr. Thompson again, he sighed helplessly and took out the CT scan.
Miss Linda, I'm afraid this time, you can't receive treatment here.
Linda stood by the window, with James silently standing beside her, always watching the frail girl in front of him.
Linda.
The sunshine is so nice today. Do you think the sunshine in America will be just as nice?
The doctor said your condition has worsened. If you receive treatment in this hospital, the chances of survival.
You know, I've always wanted to go to America, but never had the chance. Now the opportunity has come. If I go to America, my chances of survival will be higher, right?
Morning, Linda.
Linda was diagnosed with mid-stage leukemia a month ago. The cancer cells have spread throughout her body, and she has started to experience intracranial bleeding. Have you noticed her nosebleeds? Have you seen how pale she always looks?
Linda.
Because of you, she was kidnapped right after being discharged from the hospital, almost disfigured, and nearly. And yesterday, she was supposed to go to the hospital for treatment but was pushed into the middle of the road by your lover. If I hadn't been there, she would have been hit by a car.
I didn't know.
Mr. Luo, what right do you have to doubt Linda's passing?
Seeing the man opposite him remain silent, James stood up and looked down at Henry.
Mr. Luo, the pearl is always by your side, but you treated it like sand and kept running towards the mud.
With that, James turned and left without looking back. Henry left the cafe and headed straight to the hospital where Linda had been treated, demanding the staff show him the surveillance footage. The footage showed Dr. Lewis, a new doctor at the hospital, helping a young woman into the consultation room. But soon after, Dr. Lewis ran out in a panic. Then came the chaotic sounds of wheels and footsteps as the woman was rushed to the operating room. After a long time, the doors opened, and the patient was wheeled out, covered by a white sheet. Dr. Lewis was the last to come out. He leaned against the wall, slowly squatting down, covering his face with his hands, clearly crying, his back heaving. The time was 2 a.m. The staff glanced cautiously at the man beside them, whose gaze seemed vacant, fixed on a point on the screen. Unknowingly, that woman had walked into his heart, but he had been determined to push her away, to distance himself from her, never once saying a kind word to her all these years. But now, what use was it to realize this? It was all too late. Henry stood before the tombstone, staring at the photo on it. He reached out, wanting to touch the smiling young girl in the picture, but his hand stopped midway.
Linda, though I know saying this now is useless, though I know you must be completely disappointed in me. But everything was my fault. I'm sorry.
Luo Corporation.
Hurry, get ready, Mr. Luo is here.
What? He's here again?
Is this your first day knowing our boss? For the past 2 years, he's been like he's on a mission, coming to inspect every few weeks.
Why are this month's figures so much lower than last month's? Give me a reason.
Henry sat in the general manager's office, facing Mr. Wang, who stood trembling, hands clasped, head bowed.
Mr. Luo, you know the market has been unstable lately. We've minimized the risks as much as possible.
Henry raised an eyebrow and suddenly threw a document in front of Mr. Wang.
Then explain to me the discrepancies in these recent quotes and financial statements from your department.
Mr. Wang's face turned pale. Henry stared at him, making him break out in a cold sweat.
Mr. Wang, I heard your nephew lost a lot in Macau recently. Mr. Wang, you're getting on in years, and managing your team isn't as effective anymore. It's time for you to retire.
With that, he stood up and walked out, leaving Mr. Wang to collapse to the ground. Henry sat in his office, lifting his eyes from the documents to rub his temples, glancing at the clock beside him.
1 a.m. So late again.
He stretched his neck, stood up, grabbed his coat, and walked out. Instead of heading home, he drove towards the cemetery.
It's been 2 years now.
Yes, unknowingly, 2 years had passed, and Linda had been gone for 2 years. In these 2 years, he seemed like a different person, working day and night. Though he was the CEO, he was always the first to arrive at the company and the last to leave.
And a train from New York to Los Angeles. Linda watched the scenery flying by outside the window, lost in thought.
2 years ago, James helped her fake her death, and she came to the United States for treatment. Perhaps it was her strong will to live, or maybe because she had left the nightmare behind, her luck improved, and she eventually survived. After recovering, Linda became a freelance designer. In her spare time, she traveled around. At this moment, the ringing of her phone brought her back to reality. The caller was Alice, the head of Linda's collaborative team, a very capable American woman.
Abigail, where are you now?
In Los Angeles, what's wrong? Is there an emergency?
You know, we've been having some issues with our investors lately. They just demanded that we send a designer to negotiate with them. Would you be willing to go?
Our professional designers are all tied up with projects right now, and our investor is a Chinese company. I thought since you're Chinese, it might be easier for you to handle the negotiation. China?
Yes, it's MK Group in H City, China.
Linda felt her throat tighten. Thankfully, it wasn't the Luo Group, but still, it was in H City.
Clearing her throat, she was about to speak when Alice's voice came through the phone again.
Abigail, this negotiation is crucial for the survival of our team. We really need your help.
James had just finished a surgery. He took off his surgical gown, stretched his neck, and returned to his office. He took out his phone, which showed a message from Linda sent half an hour ago.
James, I'm back.
James could hardly believe his eyes. He checked it several times, but there was no mistake. It was indeed a message from Linda. He dialed Linda's number. Hello. The call was quickly answered, and it was the voice he had always remembered.
Linda? You're back?
I'm already in H City.
Why did you come back so suddenly?
There was a problem at work that needs to be resolved in H City.
Linda laughed, but James detected a hint of helplessness.
How long will you stay?
Probably quite a while. The issue is quite serious, maybe half a year.
James hesitated for a long time, and just before hanging up, he couldn't help but call Linda's name.
Linda, aren't you afraid of running into him this time?
If I were afraid, would I have come back? James, don't worry about me. It's been so long, I'm not the same person I used to be.
MK Group was quite considerate, arranging hotel accommodations for Linda. As soon as she got off the car, MK Group staff came to greet her and took her to the room prepared for her.
Ms. Linda, you must be tired from the journey. I'll leave you to rest.
After the staff left, Linda put down her suitcase and collapsed onto the bed, burying her head in the pillow, and soon fell asleep. MK Group has emerged as a major corporation in H City in recent years. Unlike the Luo Group, MK Group is internationally oriented and has invested in several overseas partnerships. If the Luo Group could form an alliance with MK Group, it would compensate for its shortcomings, significantly boost economic benefits, and even lead the Luo Group into the international market, solidifying MK Group's position in H City. So tonight's MK banquet was something Henry planned to attend, even without instructions from the elder Mr. Luo.
Hey, isn't this our esteemed Mr. Henry?
Wow, it really is. What brings you here tonight?
Several business partners who often drank together at previous banquets saw Henry and quickly gathered around to make small talk. Henry stood aside, not engaging much in the conversation. He looked around but didn't see the chairman of MK Group. As he turned to get another drink, he suddenly noticed a familiar figure.
Henry's eyes followed, only to see a back view a woman with short hair in a black off-shoulder dress. He shook his head, mocking himself internally. Why did he always mistake others for her? She clearly had. Before he could finish mocking himself, the woman turned around, seemingly to place her wine glass down. Henry's breath caught. He felt his heart was about to leap out of his chest. That face, it was the face he had longed for day and night for 2 years, Linda's face. Henry froze for just a second before quickly stepping forward and grabbing Linda.
Tonight's banquet was hosted by MK Group, the investor in Linda's collaboration team, so she naturally had to attend. Henry had always been a prominent figure in H City, so in the week since Linda's return, she had learned quite a bit about him. For instance, he had broken up with Sarah and hadn't remarried, he had become a devilishly strict CEO, and he rarely attended gatherings.
Henry? What are you doing here?
Henry kept staring at her, his grip so tight that Linda's hand turned red. They locked eyes for a long time, and people around them started to notice.
Sir, you've been holding on for quite a while. Can you let go now?
Hearing her voice, he tightened his grip instead of letting go.
Linda?
You know me?
Henry's almost smiling lips froze as the woman in front of him looked genuinely surprised.
You don't know me?
The woman shook her head, full of confusion and curiosity.
Sir, you actually know me? Am I that famous in the country already? May I know who you are?
Henry.
Upon hearing this, the woman looked at Henry in disbelief.
You're Mr. Henry?
Henry continued to stare at her without speaking.
I've been hearing about you since I returned a few days ago. They say you're an excellent leader. It's an honor to meet you today.
Sorry, I mistook you for someone else.
Linda acted as if she didn't notice Henry's intense gaze. She took 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter and handed one to Henry.
Regardless, it's a great honor to meet the famous Mr. Henry today.
Henry nodded. The banquet continued, and the earlier incident seemed like a trivial episode that quickly faded from everyone's attention. The banquet had ended, and Linda was walking slowly along the street. Even at 11 o'clock at night, the city of H was still bustling. Henry had been following Linda in his car since the banquet ended. A car stopped beside her, and she turned to see the window roll down.
Hello, Miss Linda.
Mr. Henry?
Why are you alone, Miss Linda? If you don't mind, I can give you a ride.
Seeing Henry's expressionless face, Linda knew it would be hard to refuse, so she smiled and agreed.
Then I shall accept your kind offer.
With that, she opened the car door and sat in the back seat.
Where do you live, Miss Linda?
Henry asked, glancing at the rearview mirror.
I'm staying at the Grand Hotel.
Henry acknowledged with a hum and then fell silent. Suddenly, Henry spoke from the front.
Have you always been in the United States, Miss Linda?
Yes, I've been working there.
What brought you back suddenly?
Work issues. I needed to handle some things here.
Silence fell again, and neither of them spoke. Henry drove in silence, and Linda gazed out the window quietly. Before she knew it, the car had arrived at the hotel. Linda got out and stood by the driver's window, bending down to speak to Henry.
Thank you for the ride, Mr. Henry. I'll be going now. Looking forward to our next meeting.
With that, Linda turned and walked away. After a few steps, she heard Henry's voice again.
Miss Linda.
Linda stopped and turned, smiling.
What is it? Do you need something, Mr. Henry?
Miss Linda, I haven't mistaken you. For the past 2 years, I've been hoping that if fate were kind, it would bring you back to me, and I would never let you go again.
Henry smiled.
Well then, Miss Linda, until we meet again.
In the following days, Linda did not see Henry again, and she felt a sense of relief. But the peace was short-lived, as she ran into Henry again at MK Group. That day, Linda had just finished discussing with the investment manager. As she stepped out, she saw a group of people approaching, with Henry in the center. He seemed not to notice her, and Linda, hoping to avoid him, was about to slip away quietly when she was called out.
Isn't that our designer, Linda?
Mr. Lee from MK Group spotted her and waved. Linda had no choice but to turn and walk over with a smile.
Hello, Mr. Lee.
Are you here to discuss your team's matters again?
Yes, that's why I came back to the country.
As expected, Henry asked.
Are you going back to the United States?
Linda feigned surprise and laughed before replying to Henry.
Mr. Henry, my job is in the United States. Once this exchange is over, I'll be heading back.
Hearing that Linda would soon return to the United States, Henry's heart sank. After some small talk, Linda bid farewell. As she walked past Henry, he whispered to her.
Wait for me at the cafe downstairs.
Sitting across from Henry, Linda felt a mix of emotions. Earlier, upstairs, Henry had gently held her back and whispered for her to wait. She could have pretended not to hear and taken a cab back to the hotel, but inexplicably, she found herself sitting there, waiting for over half an hour. She comforted herself, thinking it was fine. After all, she had loved him for so many years, and such feelings were not easy to let go of. This would be the last time. Today, she would draw a clear line with him.
Since you asked me to wait, I have something to say to you too.
What do you want to say?
I know you recognized me.
Henry didn't speak.
We drew the line 2 years ago. I'm back this time purely for work. Don't worry, in at most 6 months, I'll return to the US with James.
Why did you lie to me 2 years ago?
Linda wanted to say more, but Henry suddenly spoke. She paused, then let out a self-deprecating laugh, looking at the man in front of her who still had a frown on his face.
Henry, shouldn't you be the one who knows best why I faked my death?
Seeing the silent man with an unpleasant expression, Linda suddenly felt a sense of satisfaction.
But I didn't completely lie to you. 2 years ago, I was indeed very ill, so I went to the US. I didn't want to die. I wanted to live well, so I underwent more than a year of treatment in the US, and in the end, I recovered. After leaving you, I lived a very good life. I never enjoyed such a wonderful life before. This return was completely unexpected. You don't want to see me, but actually, I don't want to see you even more.
Henry felt a sudden heaviness in his heart.
For the next few months, please stop testing me. We are strangers with no connection anymore. Mr. Henry, Linda stood up and looked down at the silent Henry. I hope you remember, I no longer love you. I have my new life now. Please don't disturb me anymore. We don't need to see each other again. Let's leave it at that.
Henry watched Linda's departing figure, suddenly feeling a sense of powerlessness. Linda walked out of the cafe, ready to hail a cab, when she saw a familiar figure.
James? What are you doing here?
I had the afternoon off and thought I'd take you to lunch.
Did you just arrive?
No, I've been here for a while.
Then you. Before Linda could finish, James smiled and nodded.
Yes, I saw.
I'm so hungry. Let's go eat.
What do you want to eat?
Linda thought for a moment, then patted James's arm.
Let's go eat at that hot pot place we used to go to in college.
I was thinking of taking you somewhere nice.
James looked at Linda, who was enjoying her hot pot with great relish, and said helplessly,
I think this is nice. Sometimes it's good to feel that long-lost student vibe.
It was a small hot pot place. Back in college, James often brought Linda here to eat. After eating, Linda said she wanted to visit their alma mater. They walked around the campus, watching the young men and women walking, running, laughing, and playing.
It's so nostalgic.
Yes, so many years have passed in a flash.
Do you remember the first time we met? You saved me.
A gentle breeze blew, and the ginkgo leaves on either side of the path slowly fell, landing on Linda's shoulder. James was about to take it off when Linda turned around.
James, after all these years, are you tired?
James's hand paused as he took off the ginkgo leaf.
Why do you suddenly ask that?
James, I'm not naive. I know what you're thinking. I've always known.
James sighed inwardly. Suddenly, he raised his hand and grasped Linda's shoulder.
Linda, do you really know what I'm thinking?
I've helped you, done so many things for you, not because I wanted your gratitude or because you were my friend.
From the first time I saw you, I like you. When I confessed to you the first time and you rejected me, I thought we had plenty of time, and I would have more chances to make you like me. But I never expected you to fall for someone else and get married so quickly. Seeing you live such a hard life, do you know how much it hurt me? When you divorced Henry and went to America, it was selfish of me, but you have no idea how happy it made me. Linda, my feelings for you are no less than your feelings for Henry. Now that you're back, do you know how scared I am? I don't know what I'll do if you meet him again.
He held Linda in a half embrace for a long time. Finally, Linda lifted her head from his chest and looked into James's eyes, speaking softly.
James, I know. You've been with me for the past 2 years, and I've realized who I can truly rely on. Let's be together.
When James heard Linda say this, he was momentarily stunned.
Linda, can you say that again?
Linda gently kissed his cheek and repeated.
I said I want to be with you.
Tears filled James's eyes as he hugged Linda and spun her around.
I'm sorry for missing you all these years. Thank you for coming back to me.
Henry found out about this a few days later from designer Linda. Standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window in his office, he looked out at the vast city. A fleeting look of distress and sorrow crossed his eyes, quickly dissipating into the air. He realized he had truly lost Linda. Speaking to himself, he said,
Linda, I respect your choice. I hope you always stay happy and healthy, with a lovely child. Take my blessings and move forward. I will spend the rest of my life repenting.